Hey everybody, Coldon here with another VOX Immortalis commentary guide. So this video is for Alysrazor in Firelands, and of course this is 10 man. So the fight begins by picking up one of her feathers near the back of her room, and she'll immediately knock everyone away from her in fury and then start AEing the raid with fire damage. So we kind of choose to stack up there on the side, because once she does that AE, she'll start cleaving her way through the center of the room there in a line, and she'll molt all these feathers behind her. So there are 8 feathers in total at the start, and by picking up a feather you get a movement speed increase, and you can cast while moving as well. However, if you get 3 feathers, you'll get 3 stacks of blazing power, and this will allow you to fly. So you should pick 2 DPS at the beginning, who will both get 3 stacks and start flying around above the arena, attacking Alysrazor while they're moving. While they're doing this, there are rings that will spawn behind Alysrazor that allow the player to fly through them and gain a stacking buff that increases haste by 4% per stack. It also will sort of refresh like energy and runes and mana and things like that when you fly through it. And this can stack up to 25 times. If you do stack it to 25, the max, you'll gain crit increase by 75% for 40 seconds. So obviously it's very beneficial to keep flying through the rings and stack that up to the max. So meanwhile, the rest of the raid is down below, dealing with everything else. So I'll mention the initiates first. They are humanoid spawns that come out from the sides of the room in pairs opposite each other. And they'll just stand still. They don't have normal threat. And they'll cast brush fire pretty often, which just leaves this brush fire, as you see, in front of me, that floats around the room randomly. And if anyone steps in it, they'll take fire damage. So obviously we'll avoid that. And then they'll also cast a random target nuke on a raid member that can be interrupted, and should be. If it's not interrupted, it's not a big deal. It's not that much damage, but it does leave a fire dot on the player as well that should be dispelled with magic dispel. So you'll also see these hatchlings that are spawning. I won't really explain those right now. I'll do that next time. But to the right of me, you see there's a worm, and he's just spinning around in a circle, spitting fire out. So these spawn in sets of 4, these lava worms, and they basically form a square. So the first set that spawn always appear in the same position relative to like the starting area of Alysrazor, for example. And then another set will spawn, another set of 4, but that set is actually rotated, I think 45 degrees it would be, so that between 2 locations where worms were, the first set, another worm will spawn in that location. So after some time in that phase, usually everything should be dead, the second phase will start. And Alysrazor will start doing crazy whirlwind in the center, so make sure you move out of the center. And then of course she'll spawn these vortexes. So these spin in the same circle pattern throughout the room, and they kind of alternate paths. So players generally need to stand between 2 flying paths of the vortexes and then sidestep between those 2 paths as the vortex passes them safely. So you basically wait for a vortex to spawn, you step into that path, and then once it passes by, you go back to a safe location and repeat this over and over. So after 30 seconds of the vortex phase, she goes into this next phase. God, these are happening fast. the next phase, which just ended, is a burn phase. And there's 2 spawns, claw shapers, that should be interrupted and stunned by your tanks as best as possible. Meanwhile, the DPS should focus on the boss because she takes extra damage during that burn phase. And yeah. Right there, we almost died because of a taunt that should not have occurred on the raid, because she has a cleave attack during that that last part. But anyway, so there's a burn phase, and then kind of a raid-wide AE phase where she has to be tanked for another 30 seconds, and then we're back to the start. So this whole process repeats. So I'll go into a little more detail about everything that's happening again. So if you look in the center of the room, there are 2 eggs that were just dropped. And these will spawn the hatchling guys that you saw for a moment. So the voracious hatchlings, when they spawn from their egg, instead of having normal threat, they basically fixate on the player that's closest to them when they appear and just stay aggroed on that person. This fixate buff also gives that player 1,000 extra damage on the hatchling. So this basically allows the tanks to solo the hatchlings. They have about 20 million health, so they're quite hefty. But with that extra damage buff, the tanks will do insane damage on them. So the hatchlings don't do that much damage normally, but after about 15 seconds, they'll sort of start to get hungry, and they can gain a buff that increases their damage a great deal and their haste, and they'll get large in size. When they gain that, the only way to satiate them is to move the hatchling near one of those plump lava worms that spawn. Once they're near a worm, they'll consume it, and they'll be happy again for another 15 seconds before they get hungry again and have the chance to get huge. So this process repeats. So ideally, your tanks should time it such that they only consume a worm after the hatchling has grown in size and is using the angry buff. If the tanks are too close to the worms when they're spawning and there isn't that buff going on, then you'll have to actually deal with the hatchling for a while afterward when it is not able to get debuffed from eating a worm. So basically, just your tanks kind of have to practice that, but it's not too difficult. Since each tank gets 4 worms in total, if you basically do like 1 worm after every 20% of health, so at 80 and 60, 40 and 20, and then kill it off, that should work. And so you can see here, if you do everything well, you get a little bit of breathing time before this next phase. And so the people that are flying, I should mention, once this phase starts, they need to come back down immediately. If they're up there when she starts spinning, they'll die really fast to the crazy AE that's happening up there. But there are some rings that spawn on the ground. You can see one in front of me there during this phase. So the 2 flight DPS should try to continue going through these rings on the ground during this part, and that will allow their buff stack to remain at the maximum stack, so that during this burn phase here, they can nuke her down crazy amounts. Also during this burn phase, any direct attack on her will cause that player to gain 10% of their mana back, which I can't really explain because there wasn't that much mana spending. But so basically, like as a healer, you can spam your spells like crazy during most of the fight and just regen it all right here. And so after that 30 seconds, she does her final phase, which is her reignite, which I didn't mention before. So we have the raid all stack on her head during the ground phase, and then as soon as she appears, the first tank taunts her, and she'll start applying a debuff on that tank that increases the physical damage they take. So after about 4 or 5 stacks, the other tank will taunt her off, and she keeps doing raid damage, and then finally does a big AE at the end of that phase. So it's important the raid is all topped off. And once again, this whole thing repeats. So I assume there's a berserk on this fight, but I don't know what the time is of it. But you can see she almost died there in that last burn phase, and so now we're just waiting for our flight team members to finish her off here. And that's it. So it's a pretty cool fight, and I recommend you experiment with how you have the raid set up, especially the people up top, and see what works best for you. But good luck, and thanks for watching.
Humanity is conformity. Conformity is society. Humanity is conformity. Conformity is society. Society is this reality. The faces that saw me and the angels that warned me, they told me to run and dispose of the gun. I could have escaped, be gone with no trace. Instead I just stayed within society's gates. 'Cause I can run but I can't hide, and I must justify the way I live my life until the day I die. I live within these gates, I cannot go against, so I must see it through. Oh, there's nothing left to do. There's nothing left to do. They said I was crazy and they called me a fool, but words cannot change me and my respect for the rules. I may be part of the system, oh, but if I could rule this land, the rules would be different. But I am just one man. I am one man. I am one man. I am one man. Oh, 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 oh. 'Cause I can run but I can't hide, and I must justify the way I live my life until the day I die. I live within these gates, I cannot go against, so I must see it through. Oh, there's nothing left to do. There's nothing left to do.
So I wish I was under a tree, far away from society, where the only truth in me is the soothing sound of my own entity, while my other voice is free. It expresses words of plea to return to a stable form of reality that he did to me.
But I'm inside of that tree. That tree's inside of another tree. The perplexity is infinity, so I will just chill with a split. See, I'm inside of that tree. That tree's inside of another tree. The perplexity is infinity, so I will just chill with a split.
Oh, 'cause I can run but I can't hide, and I must justify the way I live my life until the day I die. I live within these gates, I cannot go against, so I must see it through. There's nothing left to do, 'cause I can run but I can't hide, and I must justify the way I live my life until the day I die. I live within these gates, I cannot go against, so I must see it through. There's nothing left to do.
So I wish I was under a tree, far away from society, where the only truth in me It's the soothing sound of my entity, while my other voice is free. It expresses words of pain to return to a stable form of reality that he did to me. So I wish it was under a tree, far away from society, where the only truth in me is the soothing sound of my entity, while my other voice is free. It expresses words of pain to return to a stable form of reality that he did to me. I'm inside of that tree. That tree's inside of another tree. The perplexity is infinity. So I will just chill with this life. So I wish it was under a tree.